So hi everyone, hi to the people here in the room, hi to everyone on Zoom. So we are happy to have a new JSET seminar. So JSET is a space that began in 2023 under the direction of Joel and Andrea. And its goal is to build transdisciplinary community of praxis focused on addressing social ecological challenges through collaboration, research, and education in Latin America. And with these seminars, we are exploring experiences and approaches that address those environmental challenges across ESU, different organizations, universities, and in general in Latin America. Today, we are really happy to receive Carolina Isaza from Colombia. Carolina is a biologist with a specialization in plant ecology and ethnobotany, and for 20 years, she has been working on identifying sustainable use scenarios and developing conservation strategies for plant resources with a focus on palms using ecological models. Also, she has a strong interest in conducting participatory and interdisciplinary community research in the areas of biocultural diversity and conservation. And currently, she collaborates with rural communities in Colombia to understand their perceptions of and adaptation strategies to climate change, integrating traditional and empirical knowledge with ecological information. That is the talk that we're going to see today. So Carolina, welcome, and I give you the floor to start.
Thank you, Paula, for the introduction, and thank you for really giving me the space to talk about this topic that really has been in my mind and in my heart for a quite number of years. And all this started with my grandma. My grandma used to taught me how to read the climate, and for us it was like a very current topic of conversation, because she was telling me how to see when it's going to rain, because the smell of the air and the way the clouds form, or it was not going to rain. So it was like it was a connection for us. And then, some years passed and I studied biology, not really very interested in this kind of information about traditions. But then I studied ethnobotany. And one of the lectures was this paper. And I was fascinated by it, because this paper, I don't know if some of you know it, talks about how indigenous communities in Bolivia and in Peru forecast the rainfall for the next year and how they manage their crops. How they do it? By looking at the Pleiades. So for me, it captured my imagination and brought me back to this conversation with grandma. And so I was totally told me like ethnobotany was more than plants, and took me to a different avenues of knowledge. Years passed, and I, like Paula told you about, that I studied something completely unrelated with Ticuna people in the Amazon. And a lot of our conversations were about climate, and how, because of course we depended on it to do our work, and also because they depended heavily to their crops. So they also taught me how to read the climate there, and I found that it was completely different from what I knew. So that was in my mind. I said, I need to understand really what is going on with reading the climate. But then while I was there, one of the heaviest floods for the century occurred. And they were telling me, start to getting agitated. And I found that they're concerned a lot about the climate, and they were telling me they're having issues with forecasting. So I kept going to the Amazon with the Ticuna, and this was on 2023. Don't mind the people, mind the level of the river. Okay, so this was very low. This was already very low. The river was difficult to navigate, and this was last year. So I was standing a couple meters below where I was standing in the original photograph. As you see, the level of the river was much lower, And it was so low that it made two national headlines because it was critical, especially for indigenous community, because they rely on the river to move, to communicate, to eat. And the people were already malnourished. They were suffering hunger. So I really wanted to understand how climate change is affecting them. Because why with these people? Because they're suffering. I mean, they face a lot of vulnerabilities because they depend on the environment for their survival. They also they don't have a lot of political representation, especially indigenous people. These are the seats that they hold in some of the countries in Latin America, as you see, very little. And if you go with farmers or communities, the representation is equally very low. And that leads to this lack of political representation leaves them vulnerable to face violence, and also lack of health and other, for example, subsidies to withstand any difficulties. And their economy is basically on subsistence. So this whole scenario makes them way more vulnerable than other types of communities to address climate change. So when I started to studying this subject, like for real, like really serious, I found that there were not many papers on farmers. Most of the contributions were with indigenous people in the Amazon. So with a couple of enthusiastic and determined students, we went and said, hey, let's study this, and we started our journey. And this is like where my journey has taken me so far. These are the dots that you see there are the places that we have studied. This is Colombia, and this is like the places where we've been studying climate change perceptions. So we're going to go to the where I first started. So I wanted to study Los Andes because it's where I lived and I know better how the climate behaves. And also because it's one of the most populated places in the country. But Los Andes in Colombia is quite extensive. So I wanted to focus on this shaded area that you see there, that is the Altiplano Cundiboyacense. This place is very particular because it has been occupied since pre-Columbian times, around 12,000 years before present. So a long history of occupation, and around 5,000 years with the most intensive agricultural production. It says, I mean, some archaeological information says that it held a population of 1 million persons before the Spaniards arrived. And it's been that way without interruption since that moment. And the other thing is that these places have very fertile soil. So it is the country's main basket. Is where the state where most of the food is produced. As you see here, this is the state here, and it's compared to other states, it's very big, their food production. And of course provides food for Bogota, which is the most populated area in the country, and is generally produced by smallholders. And the smallholders produce around 70% of the Bogota's food production and 35% for the country. So their importance for the country in terms of economic representative is quite high. But I mean, very ironically, I would say more than the half of the people live in poverty. This is like the 45% is the institutional, like government number, but I bet it's quite higher than that. And they are socially and politically marginalized, even though they're critical for our survival. So I study with people in 3 different municipalities in this Altiplano. And what we found with students, Jennifer Ballesteros, that you see her in the picture, and Daniel Nosa, he helped us with the different things in the project. We try to understand the adaptation measures to climate change perceived by the smallholders in this area of Los Andes. So what we found is that they use a lot of like how they relate to climate change. They relate 11 events, and they are all related to changes in the rainfall patterns, changes in the events such as, for example, where the intensity and periodicity of droughts or unpredictability of night frost, changes in wind seasonality, and many other events. And the most important for them were drought increases and night frost increase, because the night frost increase, like night frost occurs during very sunny days, but very cold nights that freeze the plants. So their effect on the crops were damaging, and they have really not a lot of technical advances to counterfeit this the damages. And we asked them how they think their crops were as vulnerable to climate change, and they perceive that around a little bit more of the introduced species were more vulnerable to climate change than the native species crops. So interesting, the vegetables were the most vulnerable, but also those are the cash crops. So where most of the money came for their survival. But it also is interesting that they all have, all of them, they perceive as some vulnerability, but for example, cereals like quinoa were perceived as not that vulnerable to climate change. So they have this Swiss Army tool to have a little bit of income, but some food to rely on. And then we see, okay, this is how you feel about the climate, but how you would adapt to these events that you're perceiving and you're definitely feeling. So we see that they have two types of strategies. One is on farm, those that take place on the farm and are directly related to agricultural production, and the other is off farm. Those adaptations are removed from farming practices, not necessarily on the farm, but are mostly economic and social character. And we'll see how they apply. So the strategies on farm they use are 13. So a lot of, and we categorize, because now you will see they're very creative and they have many possibilities, but we categorize 13 types. As you may see here, these categories are focused on soil and water conservation. For us, was a surprise to see soil, because you would think that it's how to preserve water or how to ensure that the plants will be, for example, disease-free. But what it was very interesting is that they used a lot of techniques to be sure that the soil was in excellent shape, very alive, and that gave them like a lot of ways to counterfeit what climate change was bringing. So we found that the farmers that use more strategies to adapt to climate change felt less vulnerable than those that use less. Even though they felt the climate change and the effects, they felt like it was not so severe for them. So I wanted to bring some of these testimonials they gave us. For example, usar tractor hace que los microorganismos se mueran y no alimenten las plantas. So this is a soil thing, how they use the soil. Another person said, la producción se mantiene porque tengo un buen sistema de riego. So how to, keep water supply. And this is an excellent example of creativity. She said, cuando hay heladas, aplico melaza para que haya caloría. So, how to give some calories to reduce the frost that it forms in the soil and damages the roots. So I thought it was genius. Another guy usó almanaque, el arca verde, como guía para cultivar y registro el clima. So they were very applied. A lot of these farmers, they had these kind of booklets to write the climate, how it's behaving, to see if they can make a forecast, to see if anything was giving them idea of when it was going to rain or how much the drought was expected to be. So another thing that it was for us also surprising, because you tend to think that in this area of the Andes the biodiversity is quite low, but on the contrary, we found that this is a plot than around a quarter of hectare, very small place, and you see all of the plants that are here are every place that has some different plants, and they cultivated up to 47 species of different crops with a lot of varieties. What it's a little bit concerning is that they place a lot of their income on cash crops that are the most vulnerable. So they're placing their food security and their incomes at risk, even though they're trying to spread the risk with this high agrobiodiversity. And that's on farm. And now we're going to the off-farm strategies. So one, it's land tenure. So the people that own the land tend to implement more strategies than the tenants. And these strategies were usually more costly and also more permanent, like building a big pond or having these shaded areas or a greenhouse, whereas the tenants could have only very basic stuff, like some bucket or things like that. Another that is very popular among smallholders worldwide, it's the income diversification. So almost all of the interviews hold at least another job besides farming. And that is, we thought, that's good, because some of them also sell their production in farmers market, but also others were like accountants and teachers, and they do handcrafts and all sorts of activities. This could be good, but also it could be a double-edged adaptation strategy, because if climate conditions become very severe, they can abandon the farm and dedicate to these other activities. So food production can be impaired. And one that we really didn't expect to find was the farmers' organization. And what was really something here that was also for us surprising is that the way they read the climate, they were grouped as in municipalities. So the way they read the climate is locally grained. The way they read it in Subachoque was different from Huasca and Tavio. But the way they adapt to climate was in terms of the membership to the organization they belong to. So what we found here is that they have these networks of knowledge where they exchange information, techniques, and so they benefit from the experience of more knowledgeable farmers, and also they have another technical assistance, for example, how to fight a disease. And also they have another benefits that are small loans. They build these economic fund for times of difficult times. And another thing that they did was provide little conversations where all they can talk about the problems and access to land and markets. So even though, well, they manifested they were very vulnerable to climate change, and these farmers organizations kind of fill the void left by governments, where they're receiving no really assistance whatsoever. They're pretty much alone in this regard. So that was with the people in Altiplano. Now we're going to a different place with cacao farmers. They also are in the Andes, but in lower and lowlands. So with Juanita Jimenez, we wanted to understand what were the strategies of cacao farmers to adapt to climate change. And with them, we find something really different from what we saw with the Altiplano. They said that they were characterized for events related to climate change, like drastic change in the climate, rainfall increase, changes in the temperature, and low crop yield. Some of these are similar to what the Altiplano people said, but and they all of them felt affected by climate change and define it as uncertainty and unpredictability of climate. But you have to keep in mind that when we did this study, it was some successive years of La Niña, and the rainfall during those years were increasing and very high. And it turns out that cacao is very vulnerable to excessive rainfall and changes in humidity and temperature. So this year were not good for them. They planted a lot of cacao varieties. I'm showing here some of them, just a sample. And here, this is the one in red is the most cultivated. And as you see, it is vulnerable to rainfall. And you see another here is rainfall and temperature and more rainfall. So they were having a tough time because also this rainfall and this humidity promote a lot of diseases. So their adaptations they were applying to adapt to this excessive rainfall was mainly on farm activities. Some of them used off-farm activities, but their own off-farm activities were simply selling the farm and leaving to the city. And most of the activities were low cost, where not a lot of financial input was necessary. And all were cacao related, unlike what we saw in smallholders in the Andes. And you see here, all of these strategies were related to the cacao, how to reduce the incidence of disease to the cacao. So they face a lot of hardships to face climate change. The increase of plant disease, some of them unfamiliar, they were never seen before, or with unprecedented incidence. So they tell us, we don't know what to do with this kind of disease. We don't have the varieties that we have, they don't work. And also they were feeling a lot of disappointment of the government, especially the Federación Nacional de Cacauteros, which is like the government institution that helps them to deal with this kind of situations and provides them with varieties. And they told us that the varieties were not fit for climate change. And they were told to remove their varieties, their traditional varieties, because those varieties were for poor people, they were low yield, they're unadvanced, that they should replace with the new varieties they were providing them. So they felt like they were letting them down, and now they didn't have the technical assistance to address these climate change impacts. And then they were giving them the same kind of strategies or ways to endure these impacts as it was normal. It was everything, it was normal. So they said what they're telling us is not working. And they don't have also government financial alleviation programs to adapt to climate change. And then so they're doing everything on their own. And many of them, as I'm telling you, they're saying, I'm going to cut down all of this cacao, and I'm going to put cows instead of cacao, or leave to the city, which was very different from what we saw with the people in Altiplano. Now we're going to a very different place with the Wayuu people. They live in the Caribbean coast, in the northern tip of South America here. Also, we did this work with Juanita Jimenez. Wayuu people, they account for 45% of Colombia's indigenous people. So they're the most numerous, and they have lived in these desertic and semi-desertic territories. And they maintain, like most of indigenous communities, a close relationship with nature for their subsistence. And they depend on traditional ecological knowledge for how to manage water and harvesting, especially during the dry months. And they have different occupations, such as they're fishermen, they're builders, housewives, craftsmen, teachers, and also tourism. And they rarely receive any subsidy from the government. And, you know, it's one of the main reasons why they are they have so many different incomes. The Wayuu, when we talk about the perception of how climate was changing, the first thing that they tell us is like the way they used to read the climate, it was changing. So, and then the way they used to interpret it. They say like celestial bodies, like the moon, the sun, and the star are having changes in the form they're seen and their seasonality. So, for example, this person said, las estrellas Iwa advertían la lluvia, daban lugar a la siembra. And the Iwa are the Pleiades. So you see, it's a lot of, we see some resemblance with the people in Peru and Bolivia, that they use the Pleiades as a way to read the climate. But they say that is not working anymore, because the Iwa are like the premonition of the first rains. And it's because they can see the Pleiades at the time before it starts to rain. Now, when the rain starts, the Pleiades cannot be seen anymore. But now they're seeing the Pleiades and not raining coming over. So these interpretations are the basis to read the climate. And for indigenous people is heavily related to their ritual practice and symbolism. Another person said, la luna sale de otro lugar porque no hay lluvias. So these interpretations are very important for them. So we use, to study climate change with the Wayuu, we use local indicators of climate change impacts framework that is developed by Universidad de Barcelona. And they have these systems and subsystems. The systems are like the atmospheric, the systems of life, and physical. And we saw that the Wayuu had most of the observations with atmospheric, with topics or words related to changes in temperature, the precipitation, and wind masses as the most reported. I don't know if you remember, but very similar to what was reported by Altiplano and cacao farmers. You know, changes in temperature, the wind masses, everything. And also with less frequent, but also very important, are for example, the plant cultivation, the cash crops, and the availability of fresh water. And these are, you may think it is very important for them because keep in mind that they live in arid zones. So these changes in temperature and rainfall are key for their survival, including to cultivate and to keep wild plants and animals. So here are some of the ways that they said how climate was changing. So they say, la temperatura es muy alta. Antes no era tan caliente. Sol más caliente, no hay nubes, no hay lluvia, tierra seca. Se queman las plantas como el trupillo. So trupillo is that plant that you see there in this dune of sand. It's very sturdy. It's capable of withstanding a lot of drought and stress. But for them to say that the trupillo was burning, it's something serious happening there. So there was anonymous for them to say that rainfall deficit. All of them said that water was not enough. And they said that that also people that were living in remote areas do not have water access and sewage services. So they have to obtain water from like these wells and also another type of buildings that are a part of their traditional knowledge, that are hawaiis, that are underground built water containers. And they can storage fresh water or seawater that can be desalinized a little bit. And they use all of these ways to have water to overcome this lack of water. And the people that live in the urban areas, they said, yeah, we do have access to services, but the shortage of the water is constant. They cut the water for some days and they do not have access. And also they said that the quality of the water was very low, and all of these will reduce their livelihood activities, such as, for example, feeding domestic animals or planting crops. And they expressed a lot of concern about the poor quality water because that water was make them sick. So they said that they identified 12 effects related to climate change. And the most important for them was animal mortality that was produced by drought and temperature increase. They said that the heat make the animals to be malnourished and dehydrate. And also they said that this lack of water and a lot of temperature damage the cash crops such as beans and watermelon, where those crops are fast growing during the rainy months. But since their rainy months are not regular as it used to be, they're not being able to cultivate at all. Another aspect that it was also very surprising for us is that they said the fishing has decreased due to the warming water of water bodies, and that forced the fishes to migrate to cooler areas that have greater food availability. So they said that the fishes are really not enough, and their size were small. In terms of, we wanted to understand a little bit the vulnerability of animals, because we know that they're herders. Some for the Wagyu, goats are their main livestock because, of course, goats are very sturdy in arid conditions. And we talk about how animals were vulnerable. And they said, well, a lot of people said goats are very, they're heavily impacted. As you see, they're really scraping food from those very arid soil. But other people said, no, not a single animal is affected by climate change. They have already adapted to the climate of the region. But equally, and all other people said all of the animals are affected by climate change, and we don't see the animals that we used to see. And the fauna is of great importance to indigenous peoples for many reasons. One is the cultural importance for them. This little red bird that you see there, it's called the cardinal, and it's used to see frequently. You see it in branches and then in the vegetation, but they say to us that they're no longer found, and that represents a threat to their belief systems because the bird is associated with the rains and the beginning of agriculture. So it's like a premonition of lack of abundance and water and fertility. So for them, it's like a lot of concerning the lack of seeing this bird. They also mentioned the fisheries have suffered and they report less abundance, as I told you before. And also in terms of wild fauna, they said that these, for example, here, Rafael said, los zorrillos ya casi no se ven. Se ven flacos y parece que tuvieran sarna. So these little foxes were, not properly fed. And they said that also, human causes like hunting and contamination could also be responsible for this decline in the fauna. But let's move on to what they used to do to adapt to climate change. A little bit more than half of the people said they have strategies to adapt to climate variability. And some others said no. But when we were talking, it turns out they all perform some activity to adapt to climate change. So what you said that during times of drought, they adapt mechanisms like performing rituals to call for the rain and maintain customs like reading the weather, as I told you before, or collecting water from the wells, as you see in the picture, or build hawaiis. These are the hawaiis, are like the underground built, and they keep the water there. And in response to current challenges, they have incorporated new strategies, such as, for example, here they use the roofs of the house, and they put like these tanks of industrial materials to, when it rains, to capture all the water from the rooftop. They didn't used to have this, and now this is like an invention. And also they say, we know the climate is changed, pero las tradiciones para saber cómo se da el clima se mantienen. So they're keeping their traditional knowledge alive, even though they're seeing changes. I'm going to show you now a little bit of the dance they used to call for the rains. Well, I don't know if it's working here. Let me see, because there's some reason I cannot put it. Well, I don't know. Well, oh no. Maybe I will try. Okay, I will try to see if I can. No, it seems like, so I will just leave it that link. It is quite beautiful. As you can see from this very brief image, the girl is dancing, and this dance has multiple meanings. It resembles the cardinal. So a lot of the steps, it resembles the way the cardinal moves, but also other animals. And it's an interaction between the girl and the boy. And the girls that do the dance, a lot of them, there is like the way they become women. They got into the community as from girl to woman, and they already know all the things that a Waju woman should know. And they're the women in the Waju community are the leaders of the community. They hold their matrilineal ancestry through the female. So it is, quite meaningful, but for some reason I couldn't show you. Now you're seeing the Okay.
You are not sharing the presentation anymore. Oh yeah.
Okay. Now you can see it?
Not the video. The presentation we can see it, but
Yeah,
not the
no,
video.
it seems that for some reason I cannot show the video. So that's the depth that I have with you guys. I'm sorry. It is moving already, the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, so other adaptation strategies that they have is they use wild food as this cacti that is called yotohoro, that provides food for the goats as well as the mangle. And also it gives food for the people. The fruit is very delicious and refreshing for this desertic weather. They use other strategies like reduce pollution, planting native plants for shade and protection. They like the trupillo, that very sturdy tree, and moringa, which is a different kind of tree than the used worldwide. They just call it the same. And use trunks from trupillo and stems from yatohoro to make these huts that it's called enramadas to protect from very shiny sun. Another thing that they're doing is they're adjusting their activity schedules to avoid the hottest times of the day. They're very, very hot and very dry. So they are going to fish a little bit early or later at night. And as also seeing with the people, with the cacao farmers, they're migrating to the cities in search for employment and diversification, to diversify their income and have some income. In fact, one of the girls was participating in this study. She called us for help to settle in the city, because she said that living there was no longer viable. So the concluding remarks from this study is that the perceptions of the people that live, local people, farmers, our indigenous community, are intimately linked to their livelihood, and that has immediate impact on the way they're living, their understanding climate, and the way they're surviving. And they're also saying that irregular, extreme, and unpredictable climatic events is becoming the norm, and the way they're experiencing and defining climate change. And those changes are also seen in the physical and in the biotic environment. We saw that all of these perceptions of climate change are locally fine-grained. It's on the scale of the microhabitat, the farm, or the ancestral territory. And these observations are mostly aligned with climatic models developed by scientific groups. So there is a lot of knowledge there that we can withdraw and help, to adapt. But the thing is that indigenous people and farmers, there have been ignoring the conversation mostly. For example, in the IPCC reports right up until the fifth report in 2014, there were no conversation about the perceptions of local communities. And there's still a lot of work more to do to include them in this very important conversation. And they see that there are impacts in their livelihood, decrease in yields, reduced access to clean water, especially during droughts, disruption of local ecosystems such as like agroecosystems or the wildlife. And that will eventually impact us all, right? But they're doing a lot to to resist, and they're maintaining high biodiversity to keep their survival repertoire as big as possible, use ancestral practices, adopt or maintain crops, races of animals, species, and landscapes that are resistant to this climate variability. So they're giving us a lot to cope and develop soil and water conservation techniques. Like this is all of these ancestral practices, races, and water conservation techniques. And they're also using different things like income diversification, establishing local organizations, and securing land to be able to perform all of these activities. But the current situation is that in spite of all of these things that they're doing, there is a sense of vulnerability and hopelessness that is being tried to fight with resistance, resilience, and a heavy dose of creativity. But the uncertainty of these events are making them hard to understand what's going on and how they can face the future. And the thing that's happening now is also for the people is environmental and climate nostalgia, when they used to remember how it used to be in the past, how things were. And I will leave you with the words of the urban poet Bad Bunny. Vamos a disfrutar porque nunca se sabe si nos queda poco. Debí tirar más fotos cuando te tuve. So I hope that we can keep more photos for our future generations. Thank you for the space.
Thank you so much, Carol, for the insightful presentation. And now I open the conversation for people on the chat that want to participate or here in the room. So there is like one question in the chat from Jose Guzman. So he's asking, please elaborate how the visualization the Pleiades cluster impacts reproduction. Is it its location in the sky, its intensity, like the inability of seeing is due to cloud cover or other factors?
Okay, so well, they didn't reveal that information to us, first of all. They mention it, but they first of all, the people that used to, they know better. There were elderly people that would speak in Guayanaiki, so they didn't speak Spanish, and we need a translator. And the translator said, "Oh, he is explaining to me, but he's saying me not to tell you everything." So the way because that is for us to understand, not for you. So we don't know the details, and it's perfectly fine because it's part of the information they want to share with us. So we're more than happy to know what we know. But it is apparently that it's the cloud cover that makes some, the way we see it in the from the Earth, it changes. But we don't really understand how Waju people read it in details. And also, from the interviews, the young people didn't know this knowledge either, or their knowledge was very not complete. It was the elderly people that knew better, and they were the ones who reported these changes more.
Go ahead. Yeah. Oh, hello. Thank you for your presentation. One question regarding the scale of the adaptation to the climate, to the initiatives in the Autoplano they took for countering for the water, and how the scale are almost all the people and the indigenous people or the farmers are taking some measures, or just are few trying to lead or developing initiatives. And also if there is a program or some type of extension program or some help from outside in order to adapt to what is coming on.
Yes, well, what I saw is that the response was very different from person to person. But usually the persons that are organized either in the indigenous community or, for example, local farmers organizations, they have a better repertoire and they share their knowledge. The people that were alone, for example, a farmer alone in their land, they have less of a repertoire. We were really the ones that struggled the most. And also they really are bringing everything, like what they see in the internet, from their traditional knowledge, what people from outside are, maybe giving an idea, and they're trying everything they could to see what they're testing, what it can be of benefit, and what it is not beneficial. They have some, it was very, I don't know if it's funny or sad story with the Waju, because some foreigner agency brought them these very sophisticated solar panels that use also to desalinate the water, and it required an electric plant. But these conditions are very arid and salty, and the plant was working for a month and then broke, and then these panels were standing there just piling up, doing nothing, and they were just laughing like, look, the crap that they brought for us, that doesn't help us at all. So it is just standing there because we need another plant to make it work. So how they bring us those things that we cannot use here? They were asking me, and I was like completely speechless because, right? What can I say? So really, they're trying everything from whatever the source, but I would say they're more trustworthy on their own knowledge than people. And if they're receiving any help from outside, it is very little, I would say, very little. The farmers in the Altiplano that you might think, are more closer to the city and, provide food, they might have like a credit line or subsidies, nothing. And especially for climate change, there's not really, there a lot of people talk, but they're talking about mitigation on national level, but they're not helping people on the territories. So that's the current situation.
Thank you, Carolina. That was super interesting. I have a question. This is very reminiscent of things we have heard. I work in Bolivia. I'm from Bolivia and I work there. And I just, these past few days, I've been analyzing some data that we have on perceptions of climate change that we, collected through some workshops, and there is a lot of overlap. So this was very, those papers that you mentioned, I'm gonna go and look at them. But that's the comment part of my train of thought. The question part is how how was the research received, or how do your results kind of help communities have a kind of greater understanding of their batteries of strategies, or how is it applicable or not to them? Just because we think a lot about those types of questions in this space. And those are questions that I'm always kind of struggling with my own work in terms of, how can this information be, I don't know if directly, but yeah, used by communities or appropriated in the good sense of the word by communities.
Yeah, that is actually a very good question, because we also struggle with that question. How can this social information and ecological information translate to help them? What we saw is that for many of them, it was a validation of the way they were working with the organizations. We ran a workshop here at the university with some of these persons from different organizations, and what was beautiful, it was that people from different organizations could do networking. And there was this lady that I show you at the end of the presentation. She's called her name is Clementina, and she's like, the elder with the holder of the wisdom, and she came, and everyone was very excited to meet her and to ask her about things, on how she was running the production, how she was coping with disease, and people were doing a lot of questions to her. So for us, one of the things we didn't really expect in it was that providing the space for them to talk more than us to talk, for them to know each other, to share experiences or struggles. So I think what we can do is also open those spaces for them to be able to meet and talk. And for the Wayuu community, well, we didn't have this, we couldn't because it was very expensive to fly them to Bogota. But what we saw is that they were happy to see that someone was actually being concerned that they were having all those issues in the territories, and understanding that they're not, that even though they live in arid places and they're, you know, their ancestral territories for thousands of years, they're lived in these, you know, very harsh environments. They, even though they're having difficulties to cope, and we were having a conversation on how to bring technologies that were Wayuu friendly, you know, for their climate, their knowledge, to help them, for example, with the desalination of water, and what we can do to help with that, or to, for example, to sell their handcrafts, because they're fantastic handcrafters. So it is almost about, you know, the bridging the gaps, you know, building bridges and sharing information. That I think it could be our way to give back what we are getting from them, and in a sense of the research. And I mean, that immediately, but on long term, we could do way more. Like, for example, I think they lack a lot of political representation. The farmers, they don't have that. Even though they have organizations, they have no political agenda, and they should have. And we, even though some people, they don't like mixed science with politics, but maybe we don't not need to, you know, to say which party you have to support. Is like, you have to be involved in politics, because that's the only way they will have subsidies or help or programs, to like technical programs, and also to be included in the conversation as equal partners with the scientific and the political agenda. Because they're really, like, sometimes I see in Colombia, it's like they look like more like ornamental figures in like the cup. They're put them, yeah, the community here and there, but they're not really being involved actively.
Thank you so much. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, thank you.
I have a question, Carol, and I was wondering if, because of course, like, climate change is not the only pressure that these communities face in their territories. So I was wondering, like, how this can intersect also with other pressures, like violence, or like extractive projects or things like that. Like, how those pressures can shape between them, like among them. How can they shape each other? Like, how conflict can shape the perceptions of climate change, and how those responses and perceptions can also shape how they respond to conflict and to violence, like how those pressures act together.
Yeah, well, I would say that to cope to climate change, it's way more difficult than to violence, because violence, you know who they are, the actors, but climate change is like very mysterious, silent enemy that you don't know how to deal. So it gives them a lot of ways to cope, but definitely violence in, I would say, for the people, at least for the groups that I work with, the part of being kind of in secluded environment or secluded from society was more difficult for them to have a voice and be heard, and that affects them to become kind of the ovejas negras from society, like, you know, those people that are there in their forgotten territories. And I would say that shapes a lot of how they respond, because they are responding what they have, and they do not know how to, or maybe they have tried to reach for help and no one is coming to give a hand. And violence, of course, intensifies that, because it's even making you more like closed to the outside to protect you. So the Waju people, I mean, going there, it was very interesting, because we passed by some parts that it was paramilitary territory. So you felt that you have to be very careful where you were stepping. But the Waju people are something I don't know how, but for sure they know how to handle these pressures and how to manage and deal with them, and still being owners of their land, which is, for example, for indigenous people in Colombia, is crucial, being the owners of their land. And not, and when they're displaced from the territories, that's where the tragedy starts. And climate change adaptation, once they're going back to the territories, cannot be really met.
Thank you, Carol. So, I don't know if there are more comments or questions.
I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your work. It's really important, and a lot of parallels as well with I do a lot of work in the Paraguayan Chaco. So just thinking about your comments on like solar panels and like technology that comes in and those kinds of things. And then I would be fascinated to talk another time about thinking more about like desalinization, because there's a lot of challenges in the Paraguayan Chaco with like saline water, like subsurface water and surface water that's saline, and people having water to drink. And so any kind of like way that water can be desalinated in a non-expensive, like costly, like an appropriate technology kind of like way that people can actually do it, even to reduce the amount of salt, like salts or salts, so that they can use it for, you know, animals and things like that, would be amazing to learn.
Yeah, I have a model that we want to, some colleagues that with the IRD project, they're trying to build a model that with them, they want to try it with the community to see if it really works. So if I have any news, I will definitely share it with you, because it is a topic, and for many parts of the world, I think that would be key.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Carolina, and thank you so much for everyone to assist another JSET seminar. So yeah, I think that if there's no more comments or questions.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Cuídese.
Lo mismo. Hasta luego. Gracias.
Nos vemos. Gracias por todo.
Chao.
Chao.